Good morning, Drew. Our iPad sales are in decline. We were hoping you could do something about it. Well, that's because of iPadOS limitations. See, if you really brought dual boot in support... No, Drew, I can't let you talk to the iPadOS team. You can only bring better hardware to the iPad lineup in order to turn sales around. Okay. Well, if I had to turn around iPad sales, but I couldn't improve the software, I guess I would start by making the best possible iPad ever. Awesome. So some kind of 16-inch iPad Ultra, if you will? No. We're starting with the best iPad, the Mini. Oh, the Mini. That's a bit cheaper than the Pro. I mean, just don't make it too good, okay? Just don't make it cannibalize. Yes. Okay, I got God. This. I'm gonna add this. And what have I done? In my opinion, the iPad Mini 6 is the best iPad in the lineup right now. If you want something bigger than that, I'm just gonna tell you to buy a discounted older model. There's been sales of the iPad Air 4 going for under $400. You can find the 2018 iPad Pro for around $500. That's fine for the big boys, but Ming-Chi Kuo recently reported that the iPad Mini 7 is supposed to be refreshed next year. Yes, it's fun to say that because it's 2023. 2024 is less than a year away. Isn't that bizarre? But it should be worth noting that the iPad Mini is not refreshed annually. In fact, it's even not refreshed like every other year because for whatever reason, maybe due to weak sales or something, Apple has usually left like over 2 years between iPad Mini upgrades. And the last one was pretty freaking massive. I was very grateful we got it with the iPad Mini 6 because it deserved USB-C, it deserved Apple Pencil 2 support, looking at you, iPad 10, and it was such a massive upgrade from the iPad Mini 5 that I feel like there's a very high bar to surpass with the 2024 model, and I think because the iPad Mini is so much smaller than the other iPads in the lineup, and the fact that it doesn't have a smart connector or a Magic Keyboard paired with it, and rightfully so, I really don't think a physical keyboard would work well with a tablet that small. It could get a lot of Pro exclusive features and not cannibalize from the iPad Pros because you get to say it's a different form factor, it's in a different category, it's not competing with those iPads that are primarily used in landscape and closer to that of the size of MacBooks and smaller notebooks. So the first thing I would bring over from the Pros, you guessed it, absolutely ProMotion. Because iPads have gotten 120 Hz before everything else, and I think rightfully as well because they stand to benefit the most from that high refresh rate display. A lot of people complain about Jellygate on the iPad Mini 6. This would absolutely be a lot harder to notice and a lot harder to complain about if the refresh rate was much higher. And when you're using the Apple Pencil with the iPad, that ProMotion helps it feel a lot more lifelike, a lot more immersive, and that's why iPads have had ProMotion since 2017, whereas the iPhones just got it in 2021. So if you were going to expand ProMotion to non-Pro devices, I would argue the iPad Mini should absolutely get it first, because if you're worried about it cannibalizing sales, you can just say, well, that's the Mini iPad, it's for a different demographic, so people that want the keyboard and trackpad with their iPad, they're not going to be buying the Mini, so it's okay if it gets ProMotion. But next is another one that I would really appreciate, thinner bezels, because the iPad Mini can be held in one hand. It's basically iPhone Max Plus Ultra because it's so compact and yet so capable. But because you can use it in one hand and it's so comfortable to hold, it doesn't weigh too much, I don't think you need as much bezel padding around the border for your thumbs to rest, and Apple has really good palm rejection on their touchscreens anyway, so slimming down that border close to what you get on like a 14-inch or 16-inch MacBook Pro so that there's just enough room for the front-facing camera, of course, would be sick, and I think make it a lot more futuristic looking. Plus, you could either increase the size of the iPad Mini so more people are comfortable going for it, or you could keep the display the same size and slim down on the overall chassis. That way, it's even easier to hold with one hand, and it's even more portable than the last iPad Mini. But next is something that is arguably a software feature, but I'm gonna use it against Apple because they claim it's a hardware feature. But Apple Pencil hover support. In my opinion, all devices that have the Apple Pencil 2 are likely capable of doing this, but if Apple wants to play this game of, no, you need a certain level of computational performance in order to get that hover feature so that you can highlight things with the Apple Pencil without touching the display, that feels like something that shouldn't be exclusive to the Pros as well, so they added it to the M2 iPad Pro. I'm suggesting they add it to the iPad Mini as well as the perfect pocketable note-taking device device. Yes, it fit in my pocket. I checked. But on that subject of computational performance, I'm not crazy enough to suggest that they should put an M2 or at this point an M3 chip in the iPad mini because it's small and those chips consume a lot more energy, and that means that the small battery in the iPad mini would probably be drained very quick if it had the M2 or M3 chip in it. Plus, if we can't suggest iPadOS to get any better, right? We're just assuming for the sake of this wish list that iPadOS is going to continue to be disappointing and lackluster. In that case, I would say the A17 chip, which is probably going to be making its debut in the iPhone 15 Pro and 15 Ultra, that's going to be plenty fast enough and likely built on the 3nm architecture, which should mean better efficiency and of course way better performance than what we get on the A15 chip currently. That should be capable of handling the Apple Pencil hover feature, even if that allegedly requires a certain level of chip performance. And I think that would keep the iPad mini up to date for several years to come, given Apple doesn't like to refresh the mini every year or even every other year. It's always like every 2.5 years. So go big or go home, and I do think the A17 chip will have much more RAM, probably close to 8 gigs, which will be great for the multitasking capabilities as more and more Pro apps are becoming available on iPadOS like DaVinci Resolve. And I think that at the start of 2024, if we're shipping A17 chips in these things, then it should double up on the storage offered. Like, I love the iPad mini 6, but the fact that it still starts at 64 gigs for a $500 iPad, that feels a little bit out of touch, especially now that all the iPhones have moved on to 128 gig across the board. I think the iPad mini should start with 128 gigs of storage as well. But with all of that power and all of that extra RAM, you may be tempted to suggest like, well, the A17 chip is probably going to be much, much faster than the A12X chip that Apple put in the 2018 iPad Pro, so does that mean the iPad mini 7 should get Stage Manager? Personally, having used the iPad mini 6 myself many times, I don't think that screen size is going to be very Stage Manager friendly. The split screen plus picture-in-picture is probably good enough for what you would use on an 8.5-inch tablet like that. But one thing I would not be against at all is Apple letting you dock the iPad mini with an external monitor, because, alright, it's not good enough to have its own smart connector, because trying to make a keyboard case for a tablet that small is just gonna be ugh. But for someone who wants to use a Bluetooth external keyboard and trackpad or mouse and dock their iPad mini with an even bigger external monitor, then allowing Stage Manager through the USB-C port, maybe a Thunderbolt port, that would be a really great perk of the iPad mini, because I honestly think we're getting to that point where the A series of chips are getting closer and closer to the amount of performance the M1 chip is getting. So not gonna touch iPadOS, not gonna suggest dual boot macOS, but if you're gonna allow external monitor support on certain iPads and let them have multiple apps running simultaneously on the big screen, why not give the iPad mini that little bit of a performance boost? If it doesn't require that much extra, you know, it's gotta get a newer iPhone chip in it anyway. The USB-C port is gonna be there regardless, so maybe Stage Manager only for the external monitor, but not on the iPad itself. I just think that would be a little too crammed. And that's for the most part, I guess, what I would add to this theoretical iPad mini 7, but I'm not gonna quite stop there because I have a bit of a fine print approach, which is what all of you guys want. The iPad Pro mini, right? Like, we all love the hardware that Apple's been shipping on the iPad Pros. We all just complain about the software all the time, but we've been suggesting for a while now that they should bring Pro features to the mini, and I know I listed a bunch already, but if I am theoretically able to use the iPad mini as a powerhouse for an external monitor setup, then I wouldn't mind them bringing the Pro camera system to a hypothetical, you know, maybe $700 iPad Pro mini, which means dual camera on the back, which can shoot in ProRes, ultra-wide lens as well, that hopefully gets macro mode. And because it's a huge iPad that's way bigger than what our iPhones can get, might as well throw in the 48 megapixel sensor as well. This would be an absolutely massive camera bump that would protrude massively. But because most people who buy iPads are likely going to be using smart folio covers anyway to prop them up, then the camera bump shouldn't feel too crazy compared to the already crazy camera bumps we have on our 14 Pros, which honestly, the Pro Max is not that much smaller than the iPad mini anyway. So yeah, I'm gonna say ultra camera system on this thing as well, that the iPad Pro mini should get mini LED, because by 2024, Apple will have more of those displays available, having extreme dynamic range and ProMotion. To take it a step further, because it's 2024, maybe by then, Apple could be ready for an OLED panel on an iPad. We already know that they can ship OLED ProMotions at scale, like they already have with the 13 Pro and 14 Pro. Just bringing that to an 8.5-inch 12-inch size would be amazing to have extreme dynamic range and the OLED pixel arrangement, so you get that higher resolution, and it's at a high refresh rate. This would just be to die for with the thin bezels and the incredibly capable chip. And to take that a bit further, why don't we just bring everything else over? Face ID, which of course would work in landscape mode, and of course still have center stage capability. So this just sounds like an incredibly good iPad, and yeah, I would expect there to be a price hike. Honestly, I would be comfortable if the iPad Pro Mini started at $800, $900, just because it sounds like such an incredibly capable device, just a couple of software check boxes away from replacing a lot of people's iPhone. Like, seriously, dream case scenario, if I could spend $900, even $1,000 on an iPad Pro Mini, it has Type-C, it has a really good dual camera system on the back, it has Face ID, it has OLED, it has ProMotion, and if you let me pair it with my Apple Watch and let it have just official phone numbers via eSIM, this could just be the iPad that's capable of replacing your iPhone, which maybe Apple is closer to that with the current state of iPadOS than we are finding iPads capable of replacing our MacBooks, right? So charge whatever you gotta charge for these crazy hypothetical iPad minis, but because I love the form factor so much, yeah, I would like two different versions. One that's cheaper, one that's closer to around $550 or $600, and then one that's closer to $1,000 and just goes all out with the best possible hardware. And I guess the only downside is it probably couldn't do wireless charging. MagSafe, that tiny ring on an iPad mini, would be a little bit too clunky for me, so I would keep it with aluminum, wired charging only, but doesn't need to be made of steel, doesn't need to have the ceramic shield, doesn't need to have taptic feedback even. I would be okay with leaving that out because it's an iPad. There's my crazy ideas. What are your guys' reasonable ones? Feel free to drop them down below, and thank you to everybody supporting this channel directly on Tailosive Tech Pro. It seriously helps us out a ton, as does just watching these videos, so thanks again. This is your Apple Sheep here. I'll see you all in the next one.